super excited. We're going to be back with Darcy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will make a confession, Darcy. I was nervous when we interviewed you last time.
Really?
Yeah.
He was. You were like this. I don't know if I'd say mythical,
Intimidated.
but you just had this aura in like this.
I didn't
Yeah.
know. I have no idea.
I mean,
why.
tar spot was such a big issue to
It was,
everybody,
though.
and everybody wants to ask somebody who they think is smart and knowledgeable on the issue, and then we have the person that all those people get their information from.
Exactly.
So-
Exactly. Excited to be here back on campus. So a pretty cool day yesterday. And,
Awesome
and
day.
get to do it again today. So, Andrew, we were reflecting before we started the show on just kind of the journey of hoping to talk to maybe a handful of growers, and now we've got I think as of the last time I looked, 60 countries tuning into the podcast. But Darcy, really appreciate you taking time. Thank you for hosting us on
Oh,
campus. It's a
glad.
pretty cool opportunity.
Yeah, well, since being here, have you seen all the nice little toys we have?
No, we need
Yeah.
like a
I mean,
grand
have you
tour.
toured this building at all?
We haven't.
No, they put us right to work.
Yeah.
I
Okay,
showed
so I
up
would say
and it
this
was
is the
like-
building that brought me here. When I saw this and I thought, oh, I can work in this facility in addition to everything else, I was like, we're,
No kidding.
yeah.
Well, hopefully we'll do a tour when we're done. But Andrew, I guess kick us off. Give us a little direction on what we're going to talk about today, and then we'll let Darcy.
You bet. So
introduce yourself.
we're gonna go back to the heart of a penny for your thoughts, and we're gonna talk about one specific topic versus it seems like recently we've covered numerous different topics with our experts on. We're gonna talk about tar spot. So we're gonna dig into the science and management. But it's as I was emailing Darcy the questions, I think it had been a year and a half, maybe almost 2 years since you'd been on.
Well, I was going to
Nope.
ask you, what was the last time? What was the time frame of when did
Yeah.
you have me on?
It was 2023. I remember that.
Okay.
but
End
I
of
can't.
end of 2023.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
what it was
couple
cooling
years.
off. We had Darren Mueller as a guest co-host. But yeah, it would have been 2023. So
Doctor
I mean,
Know-It-All.
Dr. Know-It-All. There you go. And so
We
you know,
we should have brought him out here.
we should have, and then made him wear a shirt
Yeah.
that we made him.
It would have been good. Darcy, before we get started, tell our listeners and viewers, you're on camera now.
Yeah.
Tell our audience about yourself, how you arrived here, what your passion is.
Okay. Well, I grew up actually in Western New York. I'm a New Yorker by training or by background. Not New York City though. I grew up on a dairy farm, so that's where I
Really?
started from. So that's why I've always had it. Upstate. So
Yeah.
between Buffalo and Rochester.
Yeah.
Batavia is the small little town that I grew up in. So we had,
Batavia.
yep.
Huh.
Dad got out of the dairy business back in 2000, but they still have a breeding herd of brown Swiss. So I have an odd knowledge of dairy cattle on
There you
the
go.
side. From there, undergrad degree at Cornell, and then went to
Oh, wow.
Southern Illinois, got my
No
master's
big
degree.
deal.
Yeah,
No
just,
big
just Cornell.
Yeah.
Southern Illinois master's degree. Actually, that's when I started working on SDS and charcoal rot were my pathogens
Okay.
that I worked on for that, and then moved to North Carolina State and worked on peanuts for a long time. So I would actually back 20 years ago, I would told you I was a peanut pathologist, not a corn pathologist.
Isn't that an odd crop, like how it gets harvested? Like I feel like very few people
it's
know
so
how it grows.
much fun.
Yeah.
And when we get later on to other things I'm looking at, I'm actually getting to go back and dig into that because
No
of
kidding.
the pathogens the same in peanuts that we're fighting in soybeans. We're
Really?
looking at soybeans right now. It's the same
Huh.
pathogen. So from there, I actually worked at Virginia Tech and University of Florida. So I've been all around the different ag areas in the United States. My husband wanted to be north of the Mason-Dixon line, so I ended back up at Cornell. We're in extension for a 100% extension appointment in vegetables for a little while before I came here. So we landed here in 2018 is the field crop
And
extension
then you were handed
pathologist.
tar spot.
And that landed, and I was just showing, I was actually giving a seminar in Illinois yesterday to their grad students, and that's the first field I went to was a tar spot field when I got here in Indiana. And that's where everything just took off from that 2018, and it's really been, and we were just talking about it, it's been 10 years of tar spot. And if we talk about the impact of extension 10 years ago, no one knew anything about it. And, I asked everybody if they had heard it in the room, and most raised their hands. So we can tell you that we've done our job
We've done
trying
it,
to
yeah.
educate about this this disease and the impact it's had on corn production.
Absolutely. It'd be fun just to ask you, you mentioned the building we're in and kind of that this was part of the draw to bring you here. Tell me just briefly about our audience. Where are we sitting, and why is it so
So let me see
significant
if
to you?
we're in the Indiana. Let me see. The Corn and Soybean Improvement Center is this facility out here at the agronomy farm. So we're here at Acre, which is the agronomy farm that's run by the agronomy department here at Purdue. I'm actually part of the botany and plant pathology department, but we do work in conjunction out here. I actually have a barn full of all our equipment. So this is actually my starting point of where I go for all our field work. We have research trials here that we run annually. I don't know the exact acreage, but we're over 1,500 acres here at this facility. And if you want to hear, I think over 80 faculty work out here from I don't know how many departments. So it's a really useful facility to get a lot of research done out here. But this is a nice shared use facility. So if I walk you through later, we can show you, we can have processing of samples, we can have grinding, we can, thrash the corn as they come in, and then I don't have to buy all that equipment. I can utilize the equipment's here.
Yeah, that's nice.
And there's a seed treatment room and everything. So there's things like that we can utilize that I don't have to have that in my specific lab, but we can use this facility.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
nice.
Yeah.
Andrew, kick us off.
Yeah, you bet. Obviously with tar spot, maybe taking a backseat this year to southern rust just a tad for the most part, but it's still an issue. In probably realistically, it's more of an issue, right? Because it overwinters here in the northern in the Corn Belt, and so I figure we pick Darcy's brain and maybe learn if there is any updates or key learnings. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but either way, it's good information to know, because this is going to be a potential issue next year versus southern rust. We never know.
Right.
Based on environmental conditions, wind currents, and all that. So I figured let's start. We actually have one of your grad students here watching, putting more pressure on you to see if her boss is as good as she thinks. I'm sure. But we're going to interview her after you're done here, Darcy. Give us a little information on your lab, kind of the research you're doing, and some of your grad students.
Okay, so I have a pretty big lab. I'm up to like 6 grad students right now, which is a lot. So I have 3 working on their PhD and 3 working on their master's. They have a diverse range of projects. So Morgan, who we'll interview you later, she mainly works on tar spot as part of her project. I think she's also dabbled in red crown rot and helped with our first report here in soybeans. Let me think about Camilla, who's trying to finish up, has been working on. She actually did some of the timing stuff that we've done in tar spot for the last couple of years. And then she also looked on some organic production questions, so looking at some of those soft products on how will they work in the system if we want to help our organic growers with disease management. And she looked at, we do research on wheat, so we look at scab control, and then soybeans, and then corn. So let's see who else. Monica is working on looking at the difference between drone applications and
nice.
ground equipment. So that's the big question, is how well is that fungicide being so we took a really basic look at it. So I'm lucky here in Indiana, we have 7 research farms outside of Acre where they can actually do field scale production on those farms. And so initially we were doing field scale, just evaluation of fungicide timing on both in corn and beans, and now we've switched. Her project is looking at the drone versus their ground equipment on disease management in corn and beans. So she's got projects across the state on that.
Nice.
It'll be fun to pick your brain on that, because one of the things that I think we talked about this when we interviewed you last time, is that a disease that's as violent as tar spot is, right? Like you're gonna see those. Well, I mean, really, I mean, maybe that's the wrong term. I don't know, but
I like it.
What we saw with southern rust was it was such an aggressive pathogen that we could really actually tell the quality of job we did with fungicide, which I don't think we always see that. And so there was a lot of learnings about our application method this year. Some good.
And tar spot's the same.
Yeah.
And it's actually beautiful on that aspect of how it can show how far the coverage is in the canopy, how long the coverage is lasting. I mean, I have some really good images of where, we sprayed with the ground equipment, the leaf was covering the top leaf, and that area that didn't get covered in the lower canopy, that's where the disease was. So you can actually evaluate how well the product's working even on an individual leaf on where it got the product landed on that leaf.
Yeah.
So tar spot's been a really cool one. It's a good one to show, we're not going to have 100% control in a field ever, because we can't have 100% coverage of every leaf that we want to protect.
Yeah. Yep.
It's always the professors and nerds like
pathology
you
nerds
that think it's cool. It's a really cool disease.
Well, you
I'm
got
not sure that those of us in the commercial
2025
world.
was a real cool year.
Yeah, real cool year. Yeah.
We get excited about seeing those diseases, even though I know.
Exactly.
You got to hide
yeah.
your excitement when you go to the field and you have severe losses.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about 2025. So we know you took a vacation,
Right.
but tell us a little bit about summarize tar spot in 2025, severity, maybe what you expected coming into the year versus what actually happened.
Right. Well, I said we can start if I look back at the spring. We actually started moving towards trying to plant early to try to capture tar spots. So a lot of the work initially we were planting lates because we knew the disease would come in late. And for fungicide evaluations, I want the worst disease pressure to give us good efficacy data. But then the question comes in, what about those fields that were planted in April? Where is the disease and how does it establish? So we start planning now in April a set of trials. And so we started monitoring, and that's something that's changed in the last couple of years. Because we had that, I could capture those first infections that really freak everybody out, that we see it June 10th, 9th, and 10th come in. And it's really early. It's not in that upper canopy. I'm on V4, V5 corn.
Yeah.
And I'm finding it, first few lesions, one big stromata on those leaves 1, 2, and 3, right?
Yeah.
And if you're not there the right week, they're gone, right? And we can find it, and then we send students back, and because those leaves have been shed to the ground or they're not visible anymore, we can't see it. So I think we were initially missing that first infection. That doesn't mean we needed to be doing anything in that point, but we were missing that first start of the disease cycle. And then, now the next cycle, the spores, when does the next infection come? And usually that is actually landed about that July 3rd week, which was one of those years where we found it July 3rd that we had severe disease in 2021. So we're now capturing that initial infection. And around that time frame, we're still seeing the right environmental conditions. It's generally cooler and wetter in April and May. And so we did find the disease, but then we went dry. I'm in northern Indiana and across the state. And it went so dry that stops the disease progression, that we could hold off. I mean, tar spot, we saw it continue to build, but it was really low.
Yep.
But by the end of the season, moisture came back. We had the right time frame of rain at silking and tasseling, so that we ended up with our standard, Morgan was rating 30% tar spot on those leaves.
Is that about normal here in Indiana?
Well, that's my plot there where we were pushing the envelope where I have a susceptible hybrid. I'm looking just at tar spot. It's good for everything else. So it's a nice clean leaf of just tar spot. Southern rust did move in, and so it was a fun rating period because not only we had a little southern rust move in, maybe there's gray leaf spot or northern corn leaf blight, but the other thing we noted is curvularia, which is a whole other topic. So we found more of that across our plots this year at a very low level, but again, another thing to complicate the situation. But in general, when I went out to the plots at the end of September, early October, we were just approaching maturity, black layer. We had beautiful, in my mind, beautiful diseases. I'm trying
Gorgeous tar spot.
But that's the goal, is to try to get good disease pressure to get a good evaluation of our management. We had plots that were, the untreated, it was just through the canopy like we normally see, and then you could see green plots still that hadn't blighted, that were the products were holding on to keep it greener.
Yeah. Was this the first year you also saw curvularia, or have you guys had that before?
We've kind of seen it on the side, and we're still working on the first report, so we've had it here a couple years in Indiana, but this year we found it here in multiple sites more than we've seen it. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know. We just had Allison and Darren on. We just talked about curvularia. This was the first year we've confirmed in Iowa, so it's kind of a new disease we're all getting used to talking about versus the southeast part of the U.S.
And it's one you
got
to.
I liked my life before we started doing the podcast because I was less aware of how many things we had going on.
Yeah. Now it's 3 or 4 new different in between. Yeah, all these new diseases.
Lucky us.
I think it's you. I think you're the bad luck.
Yeah. When we were driving here, Darcy, one of our agronomists sent us a link that there's some bug hitchhike to Iowa now that we have to worry about for the first time. So what was it called?
We didn't know what the name of it was yesterday talking to Sean Castile. We should have looked it up. But IDALS is coming out and saying if you see this bug, you should kill it and take a picture. It's that serious of a pest. So there you go. You got it pulled up.
A lanternfly.
Oh.
It looks like a stink bug.
Oh, is it the tree one?
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah. You don't.
You guys have that here? Or have dealt-
They've dealt with it because it knocks the trees out pretty good.
Wow.
Right, spotted lanternfly, is that the one? Okay.
The
But I'm not
spotted
the entomologist.
lanternfly.
I'm not the entomologist,
Yeah.
but that's the one there in the east.
It
they've been
prefers the
monitoring.
heaven tree.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is, but sounds lovely.
Well, let's talk about
Sorry
some new
about
some new updates since we interviewed you last.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some new stuff. Maybe there's not. Let's find out. I remember talking to you. We had this initial 7 hours of leaf wetness period that we were talking about, and that was kind of a trigger to maybe be on alert. When you start thinking about spore landing on a leaf, infection, and that whole process. Have we learned anything new on leaf wetness requirements, or are we still kind of at that 7 hours?
I think we're still at that. You need 7-8 hours of leaf wetness to get that initiated. I don't think we've changed from that. I mean, a lot of our modeling efforts, and we've talked about this probably. We've realized that we talked a lot about moisture being the big driver back early on until we pulled the data, and then we're like, oh, it's temperature is pulling first versus the moisture, but it's still just in general. Biology of it, we're going to need the leaf wetness for that spore to germinate in effect.
Yeah.
But beyond that, what we've seen and what's in the models is that we need those cool, moderate temperatures to get the disease ramping up into the canopy. That being said, 95 degree, once it's going, 95 degrees doesn't seem to slow it down in my mind here in Indiana once the disease cycle's going. But to really get it started in the canopy, we need those cool conditions. And we just, I think that paper just came out, where we looked at the movement of tar spot across the state here in Indiana from 2018 to 2022 or 3, I forget what it is. It's 22. And then we looked at, so we tracked the disease across the state, so it's now in all 92 counties. We can finally finish to confirm that in 2024. Last year, we finally caught up to Iowa. Iowa had painted the map a few years ago. We finished it off, Indiana, last year, and I would say every field probably has a little level of tar spot in it. But anyhow, when we had done this tracking, we did the severity maps that you've probably seen over my time where I've shown that. And then we pulled in this county weather data. Where are we on average? And it really lined up actually with what we were pulling for the model data that we pulled for the tar spot model. That in that year, so I'm looking at comparing 2021 was our severe outbreak year where we had severe disease, and then we moved into 2022 and we didn't have disease at all. It was less than 1% on average across the state. So that's a big difference in what happened. And if you look at those seasons, we had a cool May, cooler than average May that 21 year. It was on average in 2022. June got a little warmer, but then July was cooler than average in that 21. So we started it in May. We see the disease 3 weeks later, so you got to backtrack what happened in the when you first find the disease, you got to go what happened 2 or 3 weeks prior.
Yeah.
But we saw that cool May and then a cool July, so it started in May and kept it going, temperature-wise. And then if I looked at that 22 year, we were hot, and it moved from normal conditions in May to a hot. Everything in June was way warmer than on average. And so we pushed the disease off, so it really didn't ramp up. And then July cooled down. So then it finally started in July, and that's why we didn't see the disease move into the end of August, is that it just shifted. But that early May, June temperature is what's going to drive how soon we really ramp up the cycles. And then if you also flipped it and looked at the moisture, then we also had the same kind of moisture conditions where in that 21 year, we had a wetter than average June. So we had the wetter conditions, whereas in that 2022 year, we were droughty.
Yeah.
And so we were drier than average. So those two things played against each other on how the disease develops. So again, cooler, wet conditions, and then but hotter and dry, which we know is going to slow it down. And then some of the other things we were looking at in some of that model data is that it showed that we couldn't, if we hit 90% humidity consistently, that slowed the disease down too. We needed it to drop off. We needed it to fluctuate. So if you think about Indiana, we have some weeks that we're really wet, and then we go dry and we go wet. And every day we actually are wet and then dry and wet and dry. So we're having that fluctuation. Whereas if I think about why is this disease not taking off in the south then? So first of all, maybe they're too hot at that time frame to get it started, and then it's 95% humidity once it gets going in May, June, and I don't know if you've ever been in fields and those rating that time frame.
Help me understand that though. So I mean, leaf wetness is
important. Right. So you need the spore to germinate.
Right.
But then there's also a drying period and we don't know why this is happening, but there's a drying period that needs to happen. That it needs to dry off for some reason. And some of the work we've done looking at the infection process, looking histology of the infection, it's doing something within those stomates too. It seems to be utilizing so if you think they need to open and close to maybe let access and out and in of the plant, it may also, in my mind, I haven't proven this, but this may be one reason why.
So that's why you have Morgan studying the spores within the stromatophyll.
But it's interesting. It's interesting you mentioned that, because I remember when we interviewed you the first time thinking like, we're screwed, right? Because I mean, 7 hours of leaf wetness, it's like
guaranteed
every
Right,
night
we
we have some version of that. So that's actually maybe a little reassuring that the humidity can be a deterrent.
Too high, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, it feels like, I remember we kept talking about, or you kept talking about like
my shoe test.
Walking through, the shoe test, walking through the yard, and I thought, my gosh, I mean, almost every night seems that way, right?
Yeah.
I mean, or at least
even when you're dry, you can have. I mean, it seems like you go out in your yard, your feet are still wet.
Certainly in June and September, right? Maybe not in July and August, but I mean, almost every May and June, it's like you walk out in the morning and that's the way it is.
I'm just thinking how good this part of the conversation was, because I think if a statement you made, Darcy, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we often just think about just the cool temperatures that tar spot likes, but it sounds like that's a requirement to get the pathogen started. But if we have it started, then warmer temperatures doesn't seem to slow it down, and that's something that I think really adds to the conversation.
Right, and I think we're still trying to build on that. A lot of the data that fed the tar spot app is the negative data, right, where they had it and it didn't do anything. So it was very heavy that way. But I would say, so I feel like some of it seems to missing when we're saying if it needs to be cool all the time, and that's not. I think it needed to get cool to get started, but then once it's going and we have the right moisture conditions, and 95-degree heat doesn't slow it down in my fields in Indiana. But that's later on in the season, once we've got enough spores and it's already infected the plant canopy there. And if you think about, we move from the big environmental conditions to the microclimate within the canopy too, so that's all going to play a role in how it's moving. And I think there's where it's moving along a leaf versus moving up in the canopy too. So there's all these things that are interchanging and playing on.
It's an interesting statement to think about the microclimate of the plant versus the larger geography. I guess I haven't really thought about that, but certainly the environmental conditions are different once you're in the canopy versus.
So are you seeing, I remember early data showed you're actually seeing less tar spot incidence and severity on lower populations. And I remember talking with Marty about that in like lower planting populations. Just you think about the reaching dew point at night and having, as that canopy cooled off, it cooled off quicker with the lower populations, if I remember right.
No, isn't it the higher populations didn't promote disease?
Correct.
Right, yeah. So you think
lower populations were having higher
disease incidence because I think it's because we're drying, like there's some more air movement that may be moving, allowing that drying. And also, I as we were talking, I'm reminded, a lot of the times we would see the edge effect, we would see the tar spot on the edges first, right, of the cornfield where there's more open space. And then it moves in, but again, if you think about the climate changes on the edge of our border rows, then within the canopy too.
So would you say, like, thinking about that, would you say you see maybe a little bit worse if you start thinking about row width, 30 inches versus 20 inches, or has that not been looked at?
We've not looked at that one.
Yeah.
But I would suspect, looking at the population results, that probably if we're tightening the population, we may slow it.
Yeah, I might actually see less.
Versus a more open population. But those are some of the questions we still keep.
That's
every time we come in, we have more questions.
Yeah, that's weird, because traditionally you think going to narrow rows, you impact that, you create more humid environment, so you usually have worse disease.
Which is, well, it depends on the disease. Like, so so white mold be one, we want to open it up versus, so that's the thing we got to tease apart, is there's not a one-size-fits-all answer too. And that's the.
I need all of you agronomists to stop lowering populations, because I make my living by selling,
Well, so we're going to come back and say, what is your optimum population yield response? And then that's where you keep it for now. But
let's talk about temperature preferences. You touched on humidity. It seems like, what do you say, 95% humidity really seems to slow the pathogen
and
progression
down. If there's no break in that, right? So we need breaks in humidity.
Gotcha. Thinking about temperature, I mean, obviously we say it likes cooler. What's its ideal temperature?
Well, I think if I was looking at my slide the other day exactly, I think it's like under 80.
Under
80 degrees Fahrenheit is where the optimum. So that's where I'm like, most of Indiana, by July and August, we're at 90 plus, right?
Yeah.
But I think if I look at that May time frame, and we have those conditions more optimally, but how long is that period been optimum? If we have where we jump into May or April, we had some 90-degree heat.
Yeah.
Then we probably shut things down for a little bit because it got
So
high.
80 degrees and cooler.
Probably, yeah. I think it's 79 is the number that they came at, yeah.
Okay.
Or 78.
And then my big question is, we obviously track the daily highs and lows. What's the impact of the average temperature in a 24-hour period?
I think that's the number we're using is the average temperature.
Gotcha.
But it's the rolling average temperature, I think, is what's in that model for that day.
It's super interesting, excuse me, to think about 2025 in central Iowa, because we had the leaf wetness, but we have 20 days that were over 80 degrees, even overnight, right?
Right. So
I mean, our highs were incredibly high. Our band was actually relatively narrow because we weren't getting up to 100 degrees, right? It was low 90s, but then we weren't cooling off at night.
And so,
and we saw southern rust like crazy, but we didn't see the volume of tar spot, and so it's interesting. I mean, anecdotal certainly, but that we didn't see the severity of tar spot, but because we shifted our temperature so high, we saw a lot less. That's crazy.
And it's probably that nighttime temperature, right? It's more probably driven by that nighttime temperature when we have the moisture for those spores to germinate. So if it's hot at night but you have, that's the playing in there too, I'm guessing. It's more the nighttime temperature dropping cooler and wetness is what needed to get those. That's when the spores are starting to infect. And then
because that would make sense. That's when you have your leaf wet more.
Right, so that's when the infections. But if we're hot all night and we're not cooling down, then that's probably also slowed it down to keep it moving along.
Yep.
One of the things with tar spot that we talked about originally was the dormancy period and how long that dormancy period is, and that I remember feeling almost terrified by the idea that like what we see is not representative, and it could be the volume could be so much higher than what we see on the plant. Talk about the impact of the environment during that dormancy period.
So like overwintering.
The
viability of the stromata.
I guess I'm thinking more of the latency period of when the infection happens versus when we actually see the disease.
Right, and I think so. I think there's been a scare on that we should be treating before we see it.
Yeah.
I think, you have to be proactive, though.
Originally, we felt like that, right?
Right, no, because there's a
the
gap.
argument was if I can see 3% above the ear leaf.
Right, but you missed it then. If you're at 3% above the ear leaf, you really missed catching it a month ago.
Yeah.
So there is still, and we're still landing that even with the new greenhouse assays and everything. We're still landing in that 15 to 21 days, 15 to 21 days. I think it's still landing in there on putting a spore on and seeing a symptom, right? So putting a spore on and seeing that stromata finally appear where we're visible. I think we're still in that 2 weeks to 3 weeks aspect. But that being said, and this is where, early detection, because of the way the environment influences the disease in the company, even if we find it early, we got to still wait to move it in. And now that it's been here and we know that it's coming off the debris, and I would say it's a bottom-up disease just like red leaf spot, we can catch it in those lower leaves to make a decision when do we need to go, or do we need to go earlier than we thought because we see it moving.
Are you saying it's a bottom-up disease now?
I say it's a bottom-up disease.
Just said that.
I just did, yeah.
Huh.
I mean, for those fields
tell me again.
You can play it back for you if you want me to.
The fields with a history that have had the inoculum, that's where we see it move in first. So you can watch those lower leaves and find it. And I still, some of our data that we talk about on this timing and where it's moving, and I go and when a fungicide's been good or not good, you can actually see that if even if we wait till 1% at the ear leaf, we still see good disease control.
Yeah.
It's when it's above 5% is my number that I say. If you're at 5% severity at the ear leaf, you missed it.
Yeah.
But if I look backwards on when we first found it, I found the disease almost a month and a half earlier in that canopy before it made it to the ear leaf. We still have that low lag of you can find it, and every week you go out and you find a little bit more, and Morgan will probably tell you that first one is hard, and it's a needle in the haystack, and we get lots of false reports.
Yep.
But if you go back next week and try again, you could see it move along and find that and make that informed decision. I guess that's where if I'm trying to better time my fungicides, I would still be tracking it to see to delay that spray if I need to, or start it earlier.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's kind of why I asked. That you're maybe saying that it's a bottom up disease, because when we first started having this, I mean, it would make sense, I guess. You got spores blown into a new area
New area is
versus
not.
now it's overwintering, and then so I remember too some of your research a few years ago. It showed that whether you're rotated or corn on corn, there really wasn't a difference of disease severity. But I would imagine that's as inoculum builds, right, or maybe a new area. But now that it's there, maybe now it's more going to be more of a normal, like gray leaf spot, where it's a bottom up disease.
Yeah, and that's where I see very similar to gray leaf spot.
Yeah,
And then
okay.
and the rotation factor, I mean, we debate that, should I do tillage and should I do rotation? But the reality is we have so much inoculum here in Indiana and Iowa now, probably. Even though you didn't have a severe disease, there's still disease out there that's there for new disease was shed to the soil.
Yeah.
There's previous year inoculum still probably there.
Yeah. And is that why we see, being a bottom up disease now that we have inoculum most everywhere that we're talking about within the Corn Belt? Is that why we see a gap between the lower canopy and the upper canopy? And if we were to have ideal conditions throughout, would we see it, progress from the lower canopy and just have constant tar spot moving up?
And so, yeah, we still see that. So we still, when we're doing our data ratings, we rate.
That's a star for the question right there.
I think your coffee's finally kicking in. It's like Andrew's finally joining the conversation. I'm proud of you.
With Ignacio yesterday on the last episode, we had all these questions that we wrote down, and we would get stars from Ignacio based on our questions.
I think I finally won. I don't know if there's a. I think I finally won a podcast interview yesterday with Ignacio. Yeah. Andrew doesn't let me read these because he puts his really terrible jokes in, so I don't get to read the questions prior to when we sit down. So I don't get to do my pre-learnings.
Right. Yeah. So when we rate it, we actually still rate in our tar spot trials. I rated earleaf -2, and earleaf +2. That's our rating area. And so we can see all along that initially we find it -2 is where it started, and then we start getting ratings at the earleaf, and then there's nothing above. And then we'll add those as they come in. And then this last rating, it had it across the board, right? So all of them had severity up there by the time we're done rating.
Yeah. So if you get the right ideal conditions, you're going to have it every leaf starting in the lower canopy working its way up.
Depending. Well, I mean, it may not move every leaf. It may move a bunch of the middle upper
canopy.
canopy.
All at once, yeah.
Yeah. So you have movement field to field, and you have movement, I believe, in the spores up in the canopy.
I guess something you said earlier I wanted to touch on too, since we're in the science portion. You talked about an early infection at like V2, V4. And do we see a difference if you have that early infection? Is that stromata going to be producing more endo or more viable spores than overwintering? Is that like, do you see
my gut? I don't know, so I didn't take those, and we left them in the field for our field trials. But I'm guessing because we have fresh growth now, those spores are probably more viable.
So do you think would you think that field's at more of a risk for an outbreak? Does that not matter?
I think we're missing it at all the fields. Like we probably missed those initial primary infections, and then the secondary comes in. You know what I mean? So they're all, we probably have it starting that we don't see it.
So let me clarify that though. So I mean, when you're talking about like V3, V4, right? I mean, for our audience, that's a very small plant, right? I mean, So it's there and we're not seeing it.
Right. I think that's the we're walking around and look at each plant, right, in our plots. You're not looking at every, and we're finding maybe 4 or 5 plants, right?
Hard to find.
And then if you're there the wrong week and that leaf was shed, then it's gone until the next cycle cart comes in.
Okay, plant physiology question. So at V3, when do I drop the bottom leaf? So
well,
if
you
you
lose your thumb leaf, like your initial thumb leaf, you would lose. I mean, you can start seeing that. You can trick people asking your developmental stage based on leaf at that V5, V6 stage, because it's going to drop that thumb leaf.
Yeah. Right, and so the thumb leaf would be the one. Maybe
so by the end of May, I could have had
infection, and you didn't catch it. Yeah. But that infection is, I'm not worried about.
I don't want to do this.
Do I
anymore.
get a star?
I don't want to do. No, I don't want to do this anymore. Every time we do a podcast, it stresses me out.
I'm not worried about that. I guess I would, as we move forward, I'm not worried about that infection for management.
Right.
I'm more is the biology of it. That's where it starts.
Yeah.
It's the next infections, and when is it really moving in the canopy?
I was so stressed after the first time we interviewed Darcy. I'm like, this is horrendous. Like it's just like constantly
I'm gonna see
But
Sean later. He's gonna be like,
I'm gonna get some Xanax or something just so I can go to bed tonight. But Darcy, talk about, if you would. So obviously, you mentioned at the beginning we're 10 years into this thing, which is crazy because it certainly doesn't feel like that. Is it continuing to spread? So geographically, so Indiana was 2015, right?
Yeah, so the first report in the United States was Indiana, Illinois in 2015.
yes.
And well, it's kind of it's
first?
really interesting because I was talking about we talk about extension impact,
Yeah.
right? 10 years ago, no one knew about this disease other than some pathologists in our clinics that were trying to confirm it.
Yeah.
And where it came out of, it's got a 100-year history plus in Mexico. They
Right.
in Latin America, the Caribbean were dealing with it, but here in the United States, no one knew about it. So we can show our extension impact on when you ask a general audience if you heard of tar spot in corn, and
Yeah.
everybody raises their
Everybody, yeah.
hand. There's our impact is we got the message out about this one disease. I mean,
Yeah.
that's where funding's going, and everybody's trying to get on the tar
Yeah.
spot wagon on doing research. That can come back to all of us extension on how we got the word out, but also the impact of this disease that, it was knocking 50% yields off in those fields, and that was a significant impact as well. And I forget where we're going now. So where the spread. So it continues to move into new areas.
Talk about the spread. Yeah.
And so if I look at the history here in Indiana, we have it in all 92 counties, but the northern part of the state is where we first were hit. And so I felt like 2019, 18, 19, 21, that was where that big loss happened. I had some small pockets in areas, but nothing widespread. And then it went away with a droughty year. And then last year, it was like I started all over again because it moved into new areas in Indiana where they hadn't experienced the loss. They had seen the disease, but they said, oh, it's not yield impactful. But then they got hit. So that we've hit fields that had that 50% loss again because they weren't controlling it and weren't out there managing it. I mean, so it continues to move, and that's the thing is, yes, it's moving into new areas, but you also got to understand it may be cosmetic in some of those outlying areas right now and not really impacting yield, but all it takes is 1 year of the right environmental conditions, and it might blow it up.
That's what I'm
in the
thinking.
spring.
Like you start thinking of like New York and some of these areas that still grow corn and maybe a little bit cooler than the Midwest.
Right. Well, so coming from New York, I know that they have that lake effect weather because they have both big Great Lakes up there. That they have the conditions that once it really got into the state, they're going to continue to see it. And so, but they had droughty conditions this year. I was out there. I was home this summer and I couldn't find it in the fields behind my dad's house. I was looking, but again, it's all about the environmental conditions. The pathogen is now here and surviving. So then it's the environmental conditions of what's going to happen in season. And I wish I had that crystal ball because that's the question all winter is what do we need to do next summer?
Yeah.
Well, and it's especially difficult. I mean, it's funny, I guess I would call it like farmer behavior, right? So we've found southern rust, I think the last 3 years on basically the exact same day in the state of Iowa. But it's never been a concern. We've never talked about it. I had never looked up a southern rust rating on a product until like August 10th of this year. In 20 years, I'd never looked at that. And now it's like we've completely forgotten that tar spot even exists, right? We're not even talking about it. And it's like, hey, let's talk about probabilities, right? Probability is we need to be a lot more concerned with tar spot than southern rust next year.
Yes, exactly.
But certainly that's not the temperature of the
It's a great lead into
decision-making
my next
process.
question. Very good. Very good.
Let's do a podcast. Let's have a day.
We should start a show. Darcy, Sean did such a wonderful job of leading into my next question. One of the things I think about is, you got some of these diseases. Obviously, southern rust we don't have to worry about overwintering, but tar spot we do, and it can produce so many spores.
Voracious.
It's a voracious.
I remember that
it can be a
term. It's
voracious
spore producer.
Do you ever think about it? What's the
We're getting
impact?
giggles from the audience. I don't know if that's a good thing.
Was
or
that a
bad thing.
Darren Mueller word or an Allison Robertson
I think you
word?
came up with that.
I don't know. I don't use that word. I don't know. Voracious.
We'll have to go back.
I don't know. I'll have to. Maybe I said.
You guys said so many terrifying things in the original podcast. It was like,
is there? I mean, is it a thing? Is there a concern? Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. To where you have these, whether it's low incidence and severity on 1 year, it's still producing spores over winter.
Mm-hmm.
Is there concern where it's like even if we have 4 years of low disease, it just keeps producing more inoculum that keeps surviving I don't know if we know yet
That's a
how
good
long
question.
it can survive, but is it one of those things where you just keep multiplying the spores and then you have the right environmental conditions, it's going to get really nasty versus the nasty that we're used to?
Well, I think we're already here. I think we're already at the inoculum load.
We're already at the
We're at
nasty.
the nasty. But yeah, every year we're adding more, so we're replacing those that may be broken down.
Yeah.
The longevity of it, we still really can't figure like sampling that because every year we're adding more. But I could say that there's been some people have pulled out old samples, and they're still getting viable spores coming off of those samples
Even
that we've
after
stored.
2,
Just
3, 4
just
years.
leaves of
Yeah.
Yeah.
tar spot and we've stored it. And some of it's interesting, some of the new protocols they're looking at trying to inoculate for field trials to get consistent data.
Yeah.
And some of the processes collecting those leaves and putting them in a cooler and storing them cold temperature, and then we get better inoculum coming out. So the cool temperatures don't slow us down, or that having a frost or freeze isn't going to break it down. So, but I think we're slow. And that's what I think happened initially, right? So we didn't have an epidemic until 18. But we found the disease in 15. So if you think about, we had 3 years that we were
Just
slowly building inoculum, and then we had the right weather conditions in 18 that blew it up.
Yeah.
So the real estate that was consumed in Iowa specifically by southern rust, right? I mean, so Allison basically told us by the time the environment was favorable for tar spot, we were out of real estate, right? So
Right,
the rust
so-
had consumed it. But that doesn't necessarily mean 2026 we're any less susceptible, right? I mean, we have
Probably you didn't add as much inoculum as you normally have. Maybe if there what was there any at all? I mean, did you look
no,
at
I mean you
Yeah,
could
if there
you
was
could
still
find it.
some in there? So there is some still being.
It was interesting.
You could
yeah.
find it. You could find it, but it certainly wasn't like 24, right? I mean, 24 it was every field was completely consumed by the time we harvested. 25 it was, I mean, everybody was driving a red combine by the time they got out of the field, right? And so we didn't have that black dust just rolling off of the corn leaves. So does that significantly change our risk in 2026?
Well, I guess I go back to what. So Iowa rotation. Are you rotating beans, corn?
Yeah,
Generally, so
probably a
so
little heavier corn on corn.
So
than
24 corn had inoculum. You're going to go
Correct.
back with
Yeah.
corn in 26,
Yeah.
and we haven't seen like I've been in fields where that's been the start of the epidemic, even because we didn't have corn there.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that
You
rotation.
don't ever make me feel better. I just one time. Can you
Right.
give me
Well, I
something?
mean, I can go. Well,
want
that's
one.
the rotation aspect. Is I've been initially when this was starting, I've been in fields that was where an epicenter of tar
Morgan, when
spots
it's your
started.
turn to be on the podcast, will you say something positive that makes me feel more optimistic? That'd be
She's studying
wonderful.
spore production and some other things. So
Yeah,
I'm
it's
guessing
not going to go well. Yeah, yeah. this is not-
To that, I remember walking plots though, and it was interesting because you would see, you got differences in tar spot in southern rust susceptibility tolerance, and so you start looking. I still remember seeing some products that still had a decent amount of tar spot, but it was
Right.
still most products are susceptible to southern rust.
Right.
So we have more products that are less tolerant.
Yeah. There's
you
a
know what
good
I mean?
better
Yeah.
batch for southern rust than there are for
exactly.
tar
Yep.
spot.
And so I still remember walking plots and looking at the genetic differences, and I would still find some products that still had maybe 10 to 20% tar spot severity, but it was only one product in a mix of 10 that were just covered with southern rust. So I think we still have plenty of tar spot inoculum out there, despite despite it feeling like a southern rust year versus a tar spot year.
Right.
We don't
yeah.
have a sound effect that's like, wah, 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 but we need one.
And so I could say that, at least 2 years I've seen it, right? So I see it in those rotated fields that even though we were maybe even full tillage beans, that in between year, it still started in that corn year that next season.
Yeah.
So it's at least surviving for a couple years in my gut, if not longer, which you don't want me to say, but.
Right.
And you
We
think
ended
about it.
last night. Last night was so beautiful. Ignacio was here. We were optimistic about the future.
The sun
We were
was
talking
down,
about
the
all
moon
these
was
great-
out.
Yeah, I mean, we were
Yeah.
just talking about all this exciting stuff. Do we know the impact of leaf age on infection and spore penetration?
I don't know if we really see it influence it. I mean, I guess
Okay.
now that I see from all the way from leaf number 1 till
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll slow. I think it's more of when is that leaf shutting down on the infection, right? If there's no if there's no area for it to infect, then you won't see the disease, right? If the plant shutting down. And I guess I look at too, if we look at hybrid reaction, we do have some hybrids that slow down the infection, but you can actually see in some of those hybrids where the spores landed. and then there was a host reaction that kept the stromata from really developing. But you can also see sometimes when that plant begins to shut down, and there's that immune response that's happening in the plant stops happening because it's beginning to shut down, you'll see the stromata grow again, and it's like, oh, I can go again, and I can produce more spores, and its goal is to produce more offspring for next year or the new infection.
That was one of the cool things Allison brought up, and I think she's looking into some of the more molecular stuff. You know, what's the you look at PAMP and all the different triggered immunities that the plant would have. Is there a difference in an R1, R2, R5, R6 plant with all these disease, genetic resistance?
And I think there is a growth stage response, right, as well. If you look at all our data, when it really blows up in the field every year, about R3 is when that exponential increase happens. So something in R3 is triggered by the host telling the pathogen, I'm getting closer to maturity, you need to, and the pathogen saying, okay, now I got to reproduce and make more of myself before I run out of time, before the plant, I can't infect anymore. So there's some talking going on.
So you think there's some R3 different or
well, you can actually, if you look at some of those years, even in every disease curve I have, about R3 is when it takes off in that canopy as well. So that's probably where my timing.
She's building the excitement for the part 2 management conversation around.
But also, I think that plays in a role is where we need to be in protecting it if we're going to put in some herbicides.
We'll get into that with the management.
That's the next episode.
That is.
My final who writes the questions.
My final question, Darcy. After studying this the last year and a half, getting 2 years worth of information since we've talked last, has anything changed, or in any kind of thinking about we discussed the shoe test. Has anything changed regarding some of the if we don't have all this modeling and all the information you would if we're just a grower? Has anything changed regarding some environmental triggers, or just maybe some things we can notice in terms of the shoe test that maybe might trigger your concern for tar spot to blow up?
Well,
we have to scout as soon as the corn comes out.
Well, no, I know. I say so. No, don't do. You can wait. You can use us, right? But use the tools. I still say our tools are still there. But also understand your history, right? Know what your records were and when was the disease a problem, or had you seen it come in, first of all? It may not have affected yield, but is the disease there? And then, so we still are mapping. And so here in Indiana, we're still going to, I may not get to every county every year because I just don't have the people and staff, but we're still going to be out there looking at our areas, when does the disease turn on? And so we'll turn the map on saying it's active. I'm not saying spray now. I'm saying the disease is there now. You got to keep an eye on your fields, watch for it. And then, so the models now moved, so there's no app anymore, but the models are all moved into a nice little crop risk website on the Crop Protection Network. So I'm going to say you put that in and play with it this winter, and you can go play and growers can put their fields in, and we'll probably talk about this more on the management. Put your fields in, and you can go back and look at last year's season and see where the progression was, and the risk is going to look really low for the whole state on that, but you can hone in on, you can watch for this season, and it is pulling the projection based on the weather. So it's looking 5 days out. Is it ramping up? Is it going down? So you can use that. So pull those, look at that weather conditions, be scouting, and then just, track where you are and what you hear around. And I guess that's where I don't know if I answered your question.
No,
and I guess where the other question when we get into this is this 1 or 2 applications and where do we land? But we can talk more on that. The next.
Perfect.
So wrap up. Is there, what's the next thing we're trying to learn? So as we think about the disease, what do we study? And I know we're going to get the opportunity to ask those questions.
We'll let Morgan talk about this. So some of that she's looking at is water influences. So that question with the irrigation and things on that. We're looking at maturity groups and planting date in some of our trials, and then the other side is as we look at these products on the return on investment. What about mixing these generics and things like that? So we have some of those things going in, and then timing 1 pass, 2 pass programs on that. So that's kind of where we're sitting right now.
So you must feel like you're getting a pretty good hold on the nerdy science stuff. Then.
Right. Yeah. And so I have a student who's been looking at. So we had a question with the literature. It's not transmitted by seed, but we're trying to proof of concept that. So we pulled all the ears, and we're working on that. And the good news is everything we're pulling out within that ear is not tar spot. It's not phyllocora. We can catch it it's on the husks and infecting the husks, but the isolate things we're getting in the ears are the things we expect in the ears, the fusariums.
No phyllocora.
But so that's one thing. We've got a project that we're working on right now. She's working on extracting all the DNA from all those years and trying to make sure that we're not seeing it within on the seeds. So that's one thing we're just trying to revalidate the old literature. And then I don't know where else we're going. I guess
time will tell.
as you guys ask us more questions, we try to put up new trials in the field. So, but all our work is focused in the field.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of where I stand. I'm letting the others that are trying to look at protocols for greenhouse and all that stuff to work on those. I guess some of them we do collaborate. So Marty's been working on trying to monitor for fungicide resistance.
Yep.
Because I do worry about that. So
Yeah.
they're working on a protocol where they're trying to figure that out. Because we can't grow this, we can't really look at individuals. So how do we make that assessment? So there's things like that are in the pipeline that we're working on.
Nice.
I'm excited to have the management conversation. One of the things I would say, just so as we wrap up today, want to express gratitude. I know we like to joke around and kid about the anxiety that you've caused in my life, but it is really neat. I mean, when we interviewed Allison, which is probably a month ago or so, she brought up Goss's wilt. And, Goss's wilt was like this huge spike in an immediate response from the entire industry. And today we hardly talk about it, right? I know it's still relevant. They deal with it in Nebraska and maybe parts of Kansas or whatever. But by and large, really quickly, we got a hold on it. And I think about the fact that it doesn't feel like that long ago that we interviewed you, and it was like the sky is falling. There's going to be a disaster. And today we feel like we've got a lot better understanding of it. We know how to manage it. And so I think for our audience, just to express gratitude, appreciate the work that you and the people you collaborate with have done, because certainly for us to understand it and feel like we know what to look for, when to look for it, and how to respond is critical. Our management conversation will be really good, but just want to say thank you and appreciate all the hard work you guys are doing here at Purdue and all across the industry. So,
and we can only do it without the support that we have across the industry, so that keeps us going. So.
Thank you, Darcy.
Thank you.
We'll be back, talk about management.
Love it.